I want to try and get you to hear something in a slightly different way. Can all of you by now, through the great power of this organ, comprehend the fact that there is a reality behind me saying that everything is showbiz? Even on Thursday nights now, of us having this camera up and me putting on a microphone and people getting this in other cities, and very likely people will be looking at this under one pretext or another even after I'm dead. That we could be quite dramatic about it and say that in some way I am speaking for posteriors. That's not the word, is it? Posterity. But then somebody told me it meant this. Well, never mind. It's not that I'm getting up here on Thursday and putting on an act, but you should surely understand by now that all of this has an effect. It has an effect simply me being up here on the stage and you sitting out there. Also by now, without any doubt, even those of you who have no apparently mechanical inclination to follow me along on some of these great stratograms and yellow circuit universal maps that I continually sketch out, rearrange, tear up, fold over. Since we're getting close to what amounts to a new era in doing this, I want to remind you that there is a quite real, acquired, enriched simplicity to all of this. Now, there's been a purpose, and there continues to be a purpose in me talking about particle physics and drawing that into line with human behavior, pointing out the coincidences of scientific explorations now and unrecognized aspects of human life. But there is still a simplicity to this. People did not get attracted to this 5,000 years ago. Life did not produce it 5,000 years ago or today on the basis of me or someone else in the past becoming a skillful manipulator of words, of someone like me even becoming some recognized figure that what a wonderful, wise, etc. person this is, and we'll all put ourselves in his hands and we'll defend him and carry the banner. People are attracted to this on the basis that everyone on this planet, I'm going to again divide you up two groups of people. And the second group that I'm going to describe is wherein everyone that ever gets attracted to this find themselves. And the second group of my arbitrary but proper description and division is that this group of people throughout the planet feel as though they're part of the walking wounded. Now, this general description I'm going to give has validity, but remember that I do continue to point out that it's arbitrary. You can learn something from it on your own, but to make it quite simply, there seems to be people on this planet. When I say seems to be, I understand it. I don't mean I'm speculating, but I'm saying the appearance of it. The people that would seem to be, to verbalize it, either internally or externally focused. Well, let's take the second, the external, and do away with that. The externally focused are those that you and a large portion of all of humanity look upon with envy. And taking it into the circuitry, one way to do it, those that apparently are externally focused you would find, such as successful, recognized, or at least happy, scientist, to refer to the yellow circuit. Men out doing work of some kind of scientific nature, the typical intellectual. Now, once they reach a certain point that I intend by my description, such people have no real interest in such matters as this. That's one of the reasons that life has produced the Unitarians and the Episcopalians. that they go there as part of a social thing, but they're not involved with these great black nights of the soul. They do not sit around and ponder, where is life going? Is there a God? You get into the blue circuit type people. And you would find those that are successful or, again, happy, and they're normally the same thing. People, let us say, in the arts. Someone who's a musician, someone who's a painter. Now, they may mouth such things as, well, I'm attempting to define or to express great cosmic truths. But again, reaching the kind of limit that I intend by my description, they do not ponder the kinds of things that I talk about. And if you get to the red circuit level, let us take a glaring example, a prime example in our day and time, successful athletes, pro football players. You should surely be able to smell within yourself, or if you're having to look externally, that these guys do not go home, read philosophy. They do not go to classes in comparative religion. If religion pops in their life, it has to be on the basis that they find out that they may have cancer, or they've outlived their career, or they find themselves addicted to drugs and they're thrown out of their career. And then they go through this miraculous conversion. And then you may find them out on the talk circuit with a new book, How an Athlete Found God. But what you should be able to quite clearly see by now, that there is a segment of humanity that for all intents and purposes has no interest in matters philosophical, matters religious, not in the sense that you people do. They may go to church, they may claim to be a Jew or a Catholic. Someone may bring up in cocktail conversation some philosophical idea they heard on a talk show, and they may go, yes, I bet there's a lot of truth in that. And sometimes I look out in the skies and I ponder the nature of the universe, and they don't. They simply do not. Now also, let me throw in besides the circuitry is what is always passed as the upper classes. In times past it was royalty, and now it's the upper classes. And by that I truly am referring to the moneyed. You would not find the Mellons, the Rockefellers. You do not find the royalty of France. You do not find the old kings. And regardless of any stories you may have picked up in history about mad rulers, because the inbreeding certainly did produce their share of walking around fruit baskets that ran nations in the past. But such people, the David Rockefellers of today, or the King Louis of several hundred years ago, they do not lay in bed at night working up a sweat, fearing that death is going to come get them without them having lived an upright life. They simply do not, and you should be able to hear it. These people serve a specific purpose. It's not right or wrong, but note, somewhere in the examples I have verbalized for you, in all of you, and in the vast majority of humanity, they look upon such people. Based upon their own wiring, they would have certain of their own would-be heroes. They look upon them with envy. It's the feeling, to use the upper classes or the rich. And many people, the feeling is, well, if that be true, that these people, the Rothschilds of the world, that they don't worry about religion or God or death, then I see the obvious reason. They got so much money, and in some way has a magical effect that I've always suspected. That if you would give me $1 million a day, I bet you I'd drop out of this. I bet you I'd have no worries. My mind would suddenly be cleared. My emotions would be purified. And I'd never be sick. Or if I was, I could afford the greatest doctors in the world. I'd just call them, get on a jet and get here. Fix me up. Or, again, based upon the particular wiring and the magnetic attraction of the people that I'm referring to now that would feel envy, they would look upon someone who apparently has, this is my term of course I keep throwing at you, someone who apparently has a real hobby in life. And you just mechanically can look at somebody and think, Jesus, if I had been 7'8" and had the natural ability to play basketball like that, as much as I love sports, I can't imagine really being here. It's been interesting, but I'd have so much fun. I'd have not only the fun of being able to do that and be a star and be recognized, all that goes with it. A good salary, and I'd attract all kinds of people of the opposite sex. I'd be in demand at parties. Plus I'd have something to do. Or if I could paint like I always imagined I wanted to, I would be well known. I'd always have something to do. I wouldn't need people necessarily all the time if I was a writer or a painter. It'd be the fun of creating, often my own, in a little loft somewhere, or a big barn up in Cape Cod. I could go there and I can feel the kind of satisfaction that I could get alone being able to do that. Now, on several occasions over the last few years, I have thrown in a little bit about this, and I told you that in a sense that there were people that apparently, to use an old everyday term, that seemed to have life by the tail. And I told you in a sense they were life's foremost employees. And I told you in another sense that sort of compared to this kind of activity, still within the body of life, that they are in a sense the most dangerous. And I did not mean that as an attack, of course, on those people, and I did not mean it to instill some kind of acquired fear on your part that the Rothschilds are going to take over the world and stamp out all religion or some nonsense like that. But it is on the basis that that group that seems to be externally focused, they not only have no interest in such matters philosophical, or apparently no interest in matters internally. They do not sit around and ponder their navel. They do not sit around and ponder the great questions of the universe. They don't seem to have any doubt about themselves or their ability. It just seems to be go, 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 and things just seem to fall into place. But in a sense they are dangerous, and it's still all within the body of life. It's this kind of growth struggle, because indeed, should this kind of activity, and history is replete with this if you've never recognized it, should this kind of activity run head on in to this first group, the first group, and it's understandable, there's nothing wrong, this first group, no more than an ordinary person would swat a fly and kill it, will attempt to just step on this on the basis that it makes absolutely no sense to them, and therefore there's something wrong with it. It is serving no useful purpose. That if, which goes on, by the way, I pointed this out beforehand, but it operates within a tolerable range. The kind of people attracted to politics, not only in democracy, but those that are attracted to politics to forcibly take over countries and to rule them, are externally focused. And so if some activity like this begins to get out of hand, through some, let's just call it an accident, that there gets to be too much activity in the king, the president, the local chief of police in some little town hears about this and looks into it, or sends over some of his henchmen to look into this. And they come back and say, well, it's a bunch of people meeting, and I listened, they let me sit there, and I read some of their literature, and I listened to them talk, and maybe he tries to repeat a little of what's said, and the point he conveys is, this makes no sense, and they seem to be seriously involved with it. And so it will strike the king, the police chief, the dictator, even the president, if he had that much power. It strikes him on the basis, well, this is serving no useful purpose as I know it. And remember, they are some of life's most faithful employees in a certain region. And so they only have one attitude, as properly they should, that is, go arrest those people. We'll find something. Or if he had the power, he may just say, go kill them all. Well, we ain't got time for this. They're not serving any purpose. He'll try to listen to what's going on, but it makes no sense to the externally focused. All right, now back to the group in which you people and the majority of humanity exist. It is truly as though they are a part of walking wounded, which I don't believe I made up that term. I can hear it in my head from somewhere, probably a war movie or a politician, something to do with warfare. But other than that first group, and remember I'm arbitrarily splitting them all up, and it's a matter of degrees, but this is reality. There is a basic reality that is behind my arbitrary verbal descriptions, which of course all verbal descriptions are arbitrary, remember, or else they make no sense. Because the dictionary says this word means this. It did not mean something else, it means this. Which, again, is one reason I continue to play with words. Not for a game, but you must. Into the second group, it is a feeling as though everyone is part of some kind of walking wounded, that I am hurt in some way. Now, in regards to our upcoming public activities, mine and then yours, me behind it, several areas I've taken suggestions, things I've considered, and one of them is, just in a general way, it's under consideration, referring to the public aspect of this in some way, if not the primary thrust of it verbally, but in some way that this is a kind of a healing experience, a kind of a healing process. Now, of course, I did not invent that. That has always been somewhere at the heart of all religions, all the way from a healing of the spirit, as they would call it under some conditions, to a literal healing of the body. All of you have access to television now. Every city that I know of, there is no paucity of TV religious shows that you can turn them on day or night almost, and you see either studio shows, or by and large you see these evangelists, these ministers they've taped their meetings, and it's very common into the Protestant fundamentalists, which is now expanding in the same way country music is taking over as American pop. But it's no longer just country people in Alabama, it's expanded. And part of their services, of many of these, is still healing. You know, anyone who's sick, stand up and get in line and come up here. And I am given some kind of stewardship by our God. And if he so chooses, through me, I'm going to try and pass along his blessing. He has the ability, since he can do everything, to heal you. So it is a time honored, it is tied to religion. But you can also begin to see it in a certain way that it is tied to every human activity. Now in the past I've thrown out once or twice to you that, in a sense, if we said that this had some verbally describable aim to it, to become enlightened, let's say, to use the old Buddhist term, then everything every human on this planet is doing is unknowingly an attempt to become enlightened. People snorting cocaine right now, people screwing, people in church, people in an alcoholic daze, people killing somebody else. It is unknowingly an attempt to become enlightened. Now, just to put that on someone who had not much of a background to my other descriptions, that is almost meaningless. But in that same way, I can point out to you that everyone is attempting to find something to heal their feeling of being wounded. Now it varies. I could break down and give you examples. I could break it down into circuitry in the same way I was describing the examples of the apparently externally focused people into such as scientists and artists and athletes. Then I could point out to the rest of humanity that in the same way that people ordinarily are wired up to where the magnetic center of what seems to be, as it's called, their individuality, seems to be tied magnetically, seems to be focused on one circuit or the other. One circuit seems to dominate. Hence we have athletes, hence we have artists, and hence we have scientists. And at each of these three arbitrary types that I just mentioned, in the large group of those who apparently are internally focused, then I could describe that they each individual would have ways that they would feel wounded. But just feel yourself. Everyone who came here, with a few exceptions, I'm going to mention in here, I've never pointed out exactly, but with a few exceptions, here and in the other cities, and anybody that I have in some way attracted to this over the last few years, with a few kind of exceptions I'll mention in a second, all of you felt wounded, that you were looking for some kind of healing. Now, you came here with several notions, and some of it I even participated in by my kind of general fishing advertising Some of you came here that you'd been involved with reading about certain would-be mystical activities, or you had been actively a participant with some activity, and you brought over your feeling, even terminology, and for a long time, a lot of you wanted to ask me questions about what do I think about so-and-so, where you had been, or what do I think that, how do I describe what I am speaking about in some area? How does that relate to Gurdjieff, to Jesus, to Moses, to Swami X's teaching? And you learned very shortly that I simply didn't respond to that, or I told you to forget it, or I told you it didn't, had no correlation, and if you couldn't see that, you didn't belong here. But still, with a few exceptions, is everyone came here with a feeling. They might have called it my desire to be fulfilled, my desire to become awakened. I'm convinced through some reading or through some activity to which I was exposed that humanity is living in some kind of stupor. And it was described to me in such a way that I can feel it. I accept it as reality. And they say that the object is to awaken. Or that I was with some group, or I've read some books to which I have just absolutely given my allegiance, that says that man lives in the dark, that his ordinary state of awareness is in some way in a dark room, and the object of this is to become enlightened. It is still a matter that by and large people come to this in whatever form, and a not dissimilar way that people turn to religion, ordinary people, whether it just be spasmodically in times that they feel of great stress, or whether their whole spectrum of their life in general seems to revolve around their church, their religion, their synagogue. It's the feeling in some way I need to be healed. It reaches further areas than is normally verbally recognized, such as, if you care, I assume all of you have availed yourself by looking at these TV evangelists, these services that they film with 20 or 50,000 people there in attendance. And the man will say, all right, in the name of our God, I am going to attempt to pass along God's healing power to anyone who wants to avail themselves. Come up here and get in line. And out of the 50,000, let us say, sitting there, I think you and I can surely agree that probably somewhere in excess of 49,050 of them don't feel good. But notice they don't all get in line. That there seems to be something else that they're being nourished with. They seem to be being able to be fulfilled on a basis that is not simply a physical healing. That if you went through the 49,050 that did not get in line, you would surely find people there that were deaf, or had a bad eyesight, or had a kidney stone, or maybe has cancer. And you would think, well, why didn't you get up? If you have enough faith and enough interest in this and you came here, why didn't you get in line? You might have got healed. But it seems to be something else, that is not just limited to that. It is some kind of a healing, as they would say, in religious circles normally. It is some kind of healing effect of the spirit. That in some way I just seem to feel better by having been here. And yeah, I've got a growth here on my leg I've been worried about, and it may be cancerous, and I guess I could have gone up, and I sort of believe, I see him heal other people, I believe it. I believe that the God of our religion can do this, and I believe that this man that I came to see is in some way working for this God, and he has the power to do this. I see it happen. And I don't know, there's just a lot of people, and I'm way in the back. I don't know. I just didn't go up. But are you glad you came? Well, certainly. Every time he shows up, I come here. There is a simplicity to this that absolutely parallels, it tracks all religions. If you recall, a few months ago, I brought this up and I abandoned it very quickly by telling you, by attempting to preface it with a kind of caveat and a kind of, not a kind of, I specifically asked those of you that heard anything to pursue it on your own, of how captious this is and how I could not have started off presenting this in a very simplistic fashion. But there is an absolute tracking parallel between this at any given time and the religions of the day. And if you can see it, there is an absolute tracking between this and the religions of every other day. But for very specific reasons, that has had varying effects on you because none of you are the same person. This is not some common commune, as you surely see by now. There's certainly not birds of a feather here. But look how easy it is for many of you, the majority of you, to find yourself, not that it was beyond my understanding or prediction, but to find yourself almost carried into a world of almost infinite filigrees. And not that many of you did not personally get something from it. But there is a simplicity to this that periodically and otherwise, I fear is coming up, you need to be reminded that there is a simplicity to this that makes the most simplistic, at the ordinary level, the most simplistic philosophy. I mean, the kind of philosophy you see on a bumper sticker. The kind of philosophy that you can get printed on a t-shirt. This, the reality of this, makes those kind of simplistic philosophies look like it could be Kierkegaard or Plato. But you cannot start off on that basis. You cannot start out, not in a profitable degree that I could have attracted you people, on the basis of in some way, even if I had not done it religiously, the obvious historic way that religion has always been used is that somebody said, listen, I am in touch with the gods. They sent me here for a specific reason, and that is to collect up a small group of people or a group of people to help me, and then all of us, we're going to do what God says needs to be done here right now to make things better, to please Him. And so the first thing you've got to understand is that God said, we're okay. We're fine. Trust me. And then they have always had some amount of ritual, some kind of initiation that the apparent would-be or apparent prophet from the gods says, all right, I have the ability. We're going to go through some kind of eating ritual, some kind of dancing ritual, some kind of prayer ritual. In some way I'm going to touch you. There's going to be secret words. There's going to be a little secret something that you and I do in the back room. And after that, forget your wounds. The gods will absorb the wounds. You're no longer part of the walking wounded. Even though you over here, you may have a limp, and you over here may have only one eye, forget it. Because when we go through the initiation, you're going to feel this no longer of any consequence. The gods have taken upon themselves your wounds. And it's no longer of any significance, because the only thing now of any significance to you is doing the will of the gods. So we don't have long here. We've got to get to work. And you can't worry about the fact that you're a cripple. The gods called you here. The gods surely knew you were a cripple. When it comes time for you to help do God's will and to spread all this, we all know, what great people gods are. They're not going to suddenly look down or tell me, say, hey, wait a minute. How'd you let that cripple get in here? How'd you let that guy with only one eye? He won't be able to drive or fly a plane, and we can't use him. The gods took you as you were. One of the great ones, if I recall correctly from the New Testament, was one of those right-hand men of Jesus was a tax collector, which in a certain way I find more humorous, or I find more to the point than my examples of attracting a cripple or a man with one eye. If God would let in an IRS man, but if I had started on that basis, or if other people in the past, regardless of how you think history reads, at the times this has really existed, if any of it has been reflected, and I'm still not ever trying to insinuate to you people whether it was or not, but the well-known stories of Moses and the Jews, and Jesus and the Jews, and then the Romans and the Christians, and Buddhists, and Muhammad and the Arabs and the other people of that era, assuming there was some reality just behind those better known ones. It did not start out as some of the stories may have led you to believe, any of you who read it much before, that in some way a Moses or a Jesus just suddenly told everybody, listen, the guide spoke to me, and here's what they said. That is not the way it started. It started with something similar to what we're doing. But then when it reached this other level, then when it began to go public, is then it seems to be simplicity itself. That a Moses shows up and says, look, you people are fighting over worshiping a whole bunch of gods. We've got inter-nationalistic or interracial conflict here. You're killing people for all kinds of reasons. You're not taking care of yourself. We have got to come together as some cohesive unit. The gods have sent me a message to us. And it's very simple. And it always is very simple. The primary message is one of a promised healing. To take care of your wounded feelings in this lifetime, whether it seems to be continual mental disturbances and horrendous daydreams that disturb your whole life, whether it seems to be a continual broken heart, whether it seems to be that you can never find anyone who seems to personally love you. It seems as though every relationship you get in, all the way from your family to sexual relationships now, it never works out. And it's just a feeling of loneliness. All the way to that, so you might say down the red circuit level, that everybody to some degree is ill. Some people are certainly ill. You know, some people are minus a limb. Some people have bad eyesight. That you can have a cripple. You could have a man that only had one eye. But then the gods are promising a kind of healing. Not to physically necessarily grow a limb on a man who's one-legged, or to physically make a dead eye come back to life, but it is a total healing that is no longer of any importance. And it is always a very simple message. And taking into account different eras, different nationalities, different cultures, different language, the message is always that you may not be healed, all of you, physically. The gods did not tell me to promise you that he's going to grow legs back on people who has had an amputation, or to bring eyesight to the blind. It may happen, but that's not part of the deal. The deal is this, that these few years here of walking around being part of the upright wounded is irrelevant. And all you've got to do is believe that it's irrelevant. Believe that he told me to tell you that it's irrelevant. That everybody is wounded in some way. Everyone is crippled in some way. Everyone is suffering in some way. But this is not the end of it. And then it gets into various stories of, Adam and Eve, or the fall from paradise, the capriciousness of the gods, and all of that is really irrelevant, because the majority of people, that just seems to entertain the would-be intellectuals in the ministry of trying to describe in some rational way of how to take the Christian version, or even the Jewish version, that man fell from grace, that man did something to offend the gods. And up until then, there was no wounds. Everything was fine. The majority of people have no interest in that, or to try and entertain some crowd of Baptists or Jews or Catholics with theoretical, theological speculation, or to try and prove it in some mathematical, logistical, logical, philosophical fashion of how this came about. People are not interested in that. Those that seem to pursue the priesthood, I mean, it's like a hobby. It's crossword puzzle times. Is, in a sense, all it amounts to. The vast followers of religion, which we're talking about, humanity, it is the feeling that there is a healing process that's no further away than my attendance at the synagogue, at the temple, my exposure to this man of God, to the leader now of our religion, or the leader of my local parish. That the gods in some way have funnels open, still areas of communication into humanity, which is what religion is, surely, they say. And so this kind of healing process is no further away than right down the street, in conjunction with me turning myself over to it. Right now I am having business reversals, but how long has it been since I kept the dietary laws? I can't seem to stay in a good sexual relationship with anyone, but my God, it's been 22 years since I went to confession. I mean, you can expect no less. But the feeling is that the healing process is as nearby as the kosher market, as the confessional booth, or with the Protestants, is as close by. All I got to do any night of the week is go call the minister tell him, I have strayed from the teaching, I've missed the mark, I am a sinner, I feel terrible. And he says, God is always here to forgive. God is here to heal the spirit, to take away this suffering. Give yourself over to it. And so the feeling is that this healing process is just a few words away. And physically it may be just a few blocks away that I need to go see the rabbi or the minister. But once I get there, I know what it is. I'm going to tell him, or he's going to ask me, well, have you been keeping the laws? Have you been keeping the tenets of our religion? And of course I haven't. And what can you expect? Business reversals. Love affair is shattered. A fear of death. The simplicity, to take it, to give you just a little notion of what's been going on here. And I could not start off even this simplistically, but let me see if I can wrap up the last few years. It is the simplicity of finding that you can personally, I know you still attribute a lot of it to me, which there is reality to it. You attribute a lot of it to unseen forces, even though I don't talk about gods with a capital G's. You still can't help. Your wiring system still attributes a lot of this to some kind of mystical thing that even if there's not an old God like your grandmother believed, then this thing that I call the life of life has some kind of consciousness, and it is surely has selected you in some way. It surely is aware of what you're doing. In other words, there are metaphysical, spiritual forces at work. It's not just you and I sitting here and you and I engaged in the kind of task and things we've done. It's not just that. There is something above. There's something that transcends this. But the kind of simplicity that I would care to describe just for this evening, that is right on it verbally, is finding that you can establish outside of everything that seems to have been ordinary in you up to now, all motion, all feeling, all thought, no matter how intelligent you seem to be, that you can establish. You begin to feel it. You begin to have moments that you can stand there. You begin to have minutes. You begin to have, some of you, hours, that you can establish a kind of stable calm wherein you understand that the random, non-stop, frantic activity and sounds, both out there and in here, are not you personally. But if I had simply started off with you people saying that, do you hear that that's the same thing as I've been detailing as religion? If I had never mentioned gods, or if I had attracted a crowd and I said, look, I don't care whether you're Muslim, Jew, Baptist, Catholic, forget all that. This has got nothing to do with religion. But let me tell you what, the thing that seems to be your own individuality, the thing that seems to drive you crazy, the things that seems to give you fits, the thing that seems to make you suffer, the daydreams, the ideas of seeking revenge against your parents, all the debts that life owes you, that's not you. Forget it. I'll show you that there's something else that is really just like a newborn babe. You don't even know that it's ready to be conceived or ready to be delivered. It's just waiting there. And the rest of this is not you. So forget it. If I had been able, attract a group of people, and if I could have made that fly, as us men of the cloth say, do you understand, without, I could have never said anything about religion, I could have made it sound to be pseudo-scientific, or I could have said this is the ultimate level of psychology. I could have just completely denounced any notion of religion, but do you hear that would have been the same thing? Now, assuming I had attracted the right kind of people, assuming that this magnetic dance of me up here as the entertainer and you as the entertained had been brought together correctly, that is, that I could have said, all right, everything you think that's your personality is not you, so forget it. Assuming I'd attracted the right crowd and that all of you went, phew, what a relief. That in some way, as ordinary words would have it, you accepted it, you believed it. It seemed to have had an effect. That through some kind of magic, through my personality, through, apparently, some of you might have described it well, it had such an impact on me when he said it. It is surely true. He surely understands it because the words are simple. But something else happened, and it's got to be the validity, the weight of reality, the truth behind it but I feel like a new person. I'm shed of that. I'm no longer Fred or Mary, thank God. What a relief. But do you hear that that is the same process, that is that same kind of healing process I'm talking about, to be converted to a religion, or to return to your religion, to return to the voices within your own wiring system that calls back from your particular cultural or racial or nationalistic religion that says you're suffering because you have strayed. And all you've got to do is come home, and this healing process will flow over you. Look how happy the rest of us are. All right. This is a little parenthetical, but let me put this on you, because some of you should be able to get something from this. I periodically do what I'm doing tonight that all of you should do on your own, but you quite properly find yourself carried and then find yourself participating in the kinds of things I described, no matter how unearthly they may sound at times, and how far they seem to stretch the little brain rubber bands. That those who teach religion of all forms, in a sense, have a connection with their audience that I don't have with you people. And it's this, that those teaching it are as wounded as those that they are apparently trying to soothe. Let's assume we didn't hear any kind of mechanical laughter in that, because that is quite real. It's not that they're a fraud of some kind, but that is part of why they have this apparent connection with a certain audience. That is why, name any successful minister, someone of a religion, when they speak about all of the trials and tribulations of humanity, when they refer to their holy book, be it the Quran or the remembered sayings of Muhammad, the life experiences of Muhammad and Buddha, or whether it be the Torah or the New Testament, there is an unrecognized connection between those apparently preaching, passing along the messages of their God, and this audience that they seem to have collected. But it's on the basis that although the man or the woman running the religion, or that particular offshoot, that particular sect, is talking and apparently dealing in some kind of healing phenomenon of the spirit, that things sure are bad, things, and there's a reason, but it won't be this way always. And if you do live right, if you do fulfill the stated demands of the gods, your kind of suffering is irrelevant. It won't be that big of a thing to you anymore. Right, there is a kind of connection. There's a way in which the man is speaking their language because he is in the same way wounded. If that is still not clear enough, which obviously it's not to some of you, a minister, let's take these fundamentalists, which are the most active in our part of the country right now, the most visible, and he is waving a Bible and he is talking about the sins of the flesh, the way in which the gods, and he can quote these chapters and sayings out of the New Testament or the Old Testament, saying sex is some kind of holy ritual, etc., and that there is a absolute sin. There's a thing that will wound you, that will keep you wounded, and that is having lustful thoughts, let us say. And he pounds, he paces the stage, and he can apparently get a reaction. It becomes like a jazz performance, if you recall. The people are beginning to talk back, people are shouting, people begin to moan, people clap their hands, and on the surface, you could look upon this, and the yellow circuit could say, well, the effect, what he's talking about, of these kinds of lust, of people having lustful thoughts, people letting just sex, even if they don't engage in it overtly, to let this kind of sexual imagination run through them, they cannot be a Christian. And the reality of that is proven by the effect he's having on these people. Look at the passion in him, the way he's denouncing it. And they attribute it to the gods. But he's denouncing it because he's wounded there. That's why he can denounce it with that passion. That we have got to stop having lustful thoughts. You cannot live the life of a good person. You will never enter paradise. You will never please the gods. You won't. I assure you, you won't. Can you imagine the gods looking down into your little mind and seeing you having these nasty, nasty thoughts? Can you imagine that? Is that not shameful? And it's such a passion that it seems to have people out there going, oh yes, oh yes. And you see people looking down like, oh my God, he's got me. I mean, it is. I just feel it's true. And so from one mechanical external view, you could look upon this scenario and say, well, there's got to be validity, some kind of transcendental validity to what he's saying, because look at the passion with which he says it. But he does it on the basis that he is likewise wounded. And he is denouncing it within himself in the same way that he is denouncing it in general to those that would be Christians, or whatever religion it is. Right? In a sense, that is lacking here. And I'm not just saying this having to do with me. It's always lacking in this whenever it pops up. And it comes across to many of you at line level consciousness, especially in the beginning, and some of you I know still have what seems to be problems with it. And I told you that I had taken away and validated your suffering card. I made an absolute rule that you weren't to ever tell me about suffering anymore unless it was actual physical illness, that I wasn't going to respond to questions. And so, from an external, instead of just blaming it or laying what you must look at your own doorstep, let's always take the easy way out and talk about somebody else. We could have an external observer here for all these months listening to me talk to you, and you should be able to quite clearly hear the reality of this. An ordinary, intelligent, reasonable, ordinary person out on the street could listen to this, and among other things conclude that whatever I'm talking about is heartless, to say the very least, which is probably as far as they'd care to go, which is heartless. If this has any kind of spiritual basis for it, is this indeed is involved with some of the kind of things that I keep thinking I hear him insinuate, in some way serving the higher purposes of life's growth, Jesus is that contradictory. I don't hear any kind of talk about of reading people's personal problems. I don't see any kind of counseling, which surely a man of the gods, that is a part of it, is to be able to help heal, not just physically, but to help people through the crises of life, to deal with the individual quirks that seem to try men's souls, spirits, emotions, the mind. And it would seem, for me standing back behind the wall here all these months, sometimes he talks in intriguing ways, and it stretches my mind out of shape temporarily. But in a sense, I'd say he's out of touch with what's going on. He acts as though the world does not exist in the way in which I see it exist. Or he may have some group of people that's sitting here for some reason and maybe enjoy get-together once a week, but I hope that this guy, that is, me, has no plans of coming out and becoming a new Billy Graham, because the kind of thing he's doing, that's not going anywhere. This has got to help people, and people are wounded, people are hurt. And there is no message here of some great hope. There is no message about, well, just follow these rules and you will feel much better. You will feel close to the gods. You'll understand that life is not mortal. You'll understand that this suffering is not eternal. You'll understand that what seems to be your flaws and weaknesses are irrelevant once you move closer into this healing process. That is, once you become part of whatever this is. I went through all that to point out to you that in a sense, except I'm totally aware of it, or else I couldn't describe it to you now, but in a sense compared to ordinary people of religion and their apparent followers. And I don't mean followers in a negative sense. Those that apparently are getting something from the relationship. Compared to them, there is a great gulf between you and I. Because it's as though those kind of ordinary problems, that kind of ordinary suffering, it's as though I just don't take it into account. That there is no great passion of talking about the foibles of human nature. But here's the justice. Here's the basis of why this activity, and again, you should know by now I'm not simply referring to me personally, of why it is singular, is because someone cannot do this. Life cannot use somebody to do this if they're wounded in the same way you are. And the truth is, I'm simply not wounded. It doesn't mean I'm not going to die, and it doesn't mean that I don't get a sore throat. You know, I've never held me up as some kind of example for you to become, because that's not the point. I am simply not wounded. And so in that sense, even though I understand it, and I could, if we care to take it this way, assuming I wanted to bend justice, we could say I could fake it. That I could go out and get a tent, and I could make these ordinary preachers, you know, come to me for lessons. I assume you hear the validity of that. I could do it and just sell courses to them. They'd just be amazed at how I did it. Just out of nowhere, where'd you learn how to do this? But in the greater reality, I cannot. But at the very, it's mechanical, but it's quite real. At this level I'm pointing at, in a sense, I do not relate to you, even though I understand it and I see it, because I am not wounded. And everybody feels as though they're wounded. Not all of you anymore. And some of you would not even answer the question tonight. And some of you answered it too well. And some of you who answered it didn't answer it, and some of you who didn't answer it did answer it. There are enough people here, singularly, individually, that are no longer wounded. I mean, they got memory of the wounds. They know they're still there. They know all they have to do is get drunk, take a serious nap. In other words, fall back at line level consciousness, and they know that the wounds will be right back. They're still there. As long as you're alive, the wounds are there. Then there are others of you who still feel as though, maybe without taking it against me personally, you still feel as though you have not been totally fulfilled with this, and you've given it, you know, several years now, and you moved 1,000 miles to get here and gave me every opportunity, me and all of this, and yet you still feel as though I have not really been healed that much. I am still very disturbed. When it gets down, and enough of you know it now personally and have experienced it, that I can, with some profit, talk like this occasionally. Sitting in this room, there are enough people who absolutely, if they never saw me again, have the experience and their own particular understanding, which does not change that much from person to person. It's no longer a matter of words or discussing theory, that there is an absolute simplicity to this, to the point that if they had any unusual impression of me anymore, it's how can I continue to talk about something that could be said in one word once you see it, or can be said in no words, and how is it that I can continually, month in, year out, continue to talk about this, and they wouldn't mean it in some sort of negative fashion, because they still benefit from it. You know, I never thought about it that way, and it'll push them in some other area. But they understand that there is an absolute acquired, enriched simplicity to this, to the point that once you begin to get some notion of it, the things you have read and skipped over, even from thousands of years ago, from what seemed to be mystical activity, you understand that they did tell the truth, or as they translate some of the Zen into English, different time, different culture, and different place. Some great Zen master, on his deathbed, finally, his students say, "Tell us, what is the secret?" And he says, or he says, or he goes, or he says, "All right, in one word I'll tell you. I got enough breath, I'll tell you the secret is nothing." And he died. There are people wired up to find themselves intrigued with such as that, and probably somewhere on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker somebody says reality is nothing or something like that. But still, by and large, you must see, there is nowhere you can start and gain what you've gotten from this, starting on that basis, because it comes out. Everyone's wiring the best they could make of it in the beginning, that it sounds as though, look, everything is as it is. It can't be changed. It simply is. You're short, you're green, you're a Catholic, you're a Jew, you're a man, you're a woman, you seem to be intelligent, you seem to be weak physically, you seem to have some artistic ability. As far as I can tell, you got no artistic ability. That's the way it is. And the secret of this particular religion, the secret of this mystical teaching that I have been brought here to give you is, so what? That it doesn't matter. Isn't that a goddamned relief? Again, I point out to you, if you can see it, it's not that obtuse. That is the same thing as the general healing, the mechanical healing process that I was detailing for you in ordinary religion. Well, with the added little bit, they say, all right, it is as it is. But for you personally, those of us who follow the right path of the gods, as they're revealing it to me, not only are you as you are, but come to us, come back to the gods, and you won't care. Plus, someday, it'll get better. If anyone had the ability, whatever term we cared to use, to be awakened, to be enlightened, if anyone could have that happen to them by me or someone else who understood something, or even somebody who didn't understand it, if you want to really stretch justice, to be told under some conditions, and them seem to be correctly attracted to the source of this, and the source says, look around you. You see how things are? That's the way they are. And they're not going to change. But, and suddenly you went, ah! And you were totally carried beyond the field of the wounded. That is, suddenly you were enlightened, awakened, etc. If that was possible, you would be doing this. You'd have been drafted for my job somewhere on this planet. In other words, all it took was that. But you surely see by now, which is a strictly rhetorical question, if I had told you that through some process of attracting you to some meeting or somewhere, and I had given you that in a sentence or so, what would you have gotten from that? And yet, what I'm telling you, it's a fair description. But it is a kind of enriched, acquired simplicity. It is being able to move outside of this vortex. People out in the ordinary world have coined this term in literature. I'm sure you've all heard somebody will say under adverse circumstances when they seem to be doomed by prevailing conditions, somebody in a novel, somebody in a movie will say, well, at times I look upon life and it strikes me quite clearly, we're all simply puppets on a string. All right, in a sense, that is true. But how about this? You remember my line level of consciousness with my old diagram of the nervous system. Ordinarily, people are puppets on a string, but the string is this. If you want to carry that everybody is tied to that line. But rather than this static line that I have drawn for so long, I told you that there were variations within the line. But let me symbolically push it just a little further. Whatever I mean by all of this, just trust me, you've heard me say this enough times now. It's at this line level that the primal flow, whatever that may be, whatever I may really mean by that and understand by it, is working in humanity. It's always up here. At times it was down where it was just dealing with almost the red circuit and then the blue and etc., but wherever it is. But it is in continual movement. And the line is not really like that. The line would be more on the basis of this. So what you have, the feeling, and I'm doing this for a specific reason, there's absolute validity, as you would call it, physical validity to what I'm describing. That you could take it as everyone is hung on strings, that we're all like puppets at the ordinary level. But the primal flow is always in this kind of activity. This is a variation of me using the description several weeks ago of the vortex, this continual whirlwind. But the primal flow is always moving in this kind of fashion. And so all people are feeling as though they're continually being jerked about Now, remember, I'm still talking now about the group of those that seem to be internally focused. Those smaller ones that seem to be externally focused that I start out describing do not feel this in the same way. But the majority of humanity feels this going on. That I am continually being jerked up and down. They call it moods, they call it luck, they call it the inability to concentrate, they call it the inability to hold on to a permanent relationship with somebody, they call it the vicissitudes of life, they call it the fates, they call it the evil workings of satanical forces, or the times they say, well, I'm being blessed by the gods for some unknown reason, find themselves up here. But it's as though they unknowingly came up with a fair description. Now that I've taken it under my own wing, it's a fair description of people saying, well, I feel as though I am no more than a puppet on a string and some great hand is just jerking and just throwing me here and about across the little stage, and I've just got no control. Let me put it a slightly different way. The reality, the personal, experiential reality behind all of this, that now enough people have for themselves that I can talk this way, and enough of you, as I've said, have degrees of it that if we melted you all down, we'd have one hell of a person. And if we put you all together and melted you down, I'd have somebody to chat with, assuming we had anything to say to each other. There is a simplicity to this that absolutely heals everything. Me saying I'm not wounded, was in no wise an advertisement for me. Because, remember, I've always warned you to keep developing your hobbies. Because if you want any admission, closest thing when you reach a certain point to any wound is terminal ennui. An advertisement for me. Because, remember, I've always warned you to keep developing your hobbies. Because if you want any admission, closest thing when you reach a certain point to any wound is terminal ennui. But if now I, in some way, pulled you aside, or you asked to see me, and you said, I keep having these fleeting sensations that I'm almost beginning to break through to some other kind of universe, or I just know I'm about to go above the line in some dramatic degree. I just know that my brain itself, whatever description I've used in the past, and you turn it back on me, that I'm almost there. Can you do something? Can you tell me something? And if I agreed that in the fewest words, to tell you the best I could in words, the most that I can ever tell anybody, or that I will ever tell anybody, and I simply looked at you under these exciting conditions, and you feeling as though something will happen, and I just said, there's nothing to this. That'd be one possible description. I guess I should have started off in a lower note with my series of possibilities, but I could have started out and just said, everything is all right. Or I could have said, everything will be all right. Or if I had said, you're getting close to the secret, you're close enough, I'm going to tell you the secret. I'm going to tell you, there is no secret. There is reality behind what I'm about to say right now. There are some of you in here, not necessarily continually is not the point, but there are enough of you in here, as I've mentioned, I could get you at the right occasion, or I could get around you probably 15 minutes under any kind of guise and get you to the point that I could almost, of course I mean this allegorically, metaphorically, almost slap you into the secret. That you just verge around the edges of it. I don't mean that you're not doing anything correctly, and it's your fault. But you just walk along the edges that I could almost slap you with maybe a few words or something, even non-verbally, and there you'd be. It is possible. Very possible. I know, just very, very possible. It's not nearly as mystical as you might think once you understand it. But those that have already now the continuing experience of this, here in this room, if I were to go back now and ask them, and I'm telling you, I guarantee this, but I want you to hear something behind the words. If I went back now and said, do you wish I had done that? Or do you suggest I do that with somebody else in the group? Their answer would be no. Or if I said, what if I'd gone back and I told you I could have saved you several years? That if back, do you remember in 1979 that you and I drove down to Macon to pick up a jukebox or something, and we stopped and we drank coffee for a couple hours at that restaurant, and we were talking about this and that, and you say, yeah. You said, can you hear me? By the time we left that restaurant, paid the bill, do you remember that you were in a kind of a different mood? And you would have certainly said, yeah. And I said, right then, between us leaving the door of that restaurant and getting back in the car, I could have turned to you and I could have made it happen. And you say, all right, I believe it, without any doubt. And I said, all right, I could have saved you years. Do you wish I'd done it? Their answer would be no. Unconditionally no. And they could not even describe it. I certainly wouldn't ask them to, because if they tried to describe it, they'd have to lie. But they absolutely would not. The main thrust of this evening was to remind you that this is not nearly as otherworldly, as flighty, and this is no attack on taking notes by any means, but of you filling up notebooks, remembering what I said. This is part of the process. You're doing it because of me, so you're not doing anything correctly. But if this began to fill up volumes, 2 or 3 notebooks you have now, or that we have these tapes and you can come back and listen to them, and that apparently I keep constructing almost an entirely new universe that answers almost every question, not just theoretically, that you undertake some of the tasks, you begin to feel that this universe I have mapped out is realer, more real, than any you have ever touched before. And that nobody sees it. You never find one like me that can see this and describe it in such a way that you begin to get glimpses of it without any doubt. It's not open to discussion. But then if I were to tell you, all right, all of this leads you, in a sense, nowhere. But it's leading you to a secret. And I've always said that there is a secret that I will never tell anybody, or I can't tell anybody. I always like to throw them in both so that you can worry about which is it. That I can't, or for some reason I won't. But I assure you there's always been that secret that everyone involved with my job throughout history, they never told anybody. Now, I'll leave it to you whether they couldn't or they wouldn't. But what if I said, all right, I'm going to tell you the closest to the secret that I'll ever tell you. And that simply is, there is no secret. Now, assuming that there is a profitable validity, at least a hinted validity, to me even throwing out this kind of apparently, partially facetious example, and that there is no secret, how do you lead somebody from being the walking wounded, living not in the center of a vortex, but in the vortex, of being the puppet on the string? How do you lead them from there to somewhere? And it's not simply to say you go back in a loop to where you started, but it could verbally be made to sound that way. To go back to a point that, all right, things are as they are, and everything I've done led me to see that things are as they are. But it is not any longer simplicity. It is an acquired simplicity. It is an acquired understanding that is beyond the hold of line-level consciousness. It heals all wounds. But I am continually aware of the fact that everyone comes here wounded. Just the world is wounded, as I said, with a few examples that the ones that I lumped under those that apparently are externally focused. I am aware of the fact of sitting right here and the people still in varying degrees of newness to me in this and other places hearing these tapes still feel that there are wounds that they personally have that are of such magnitude, of such intensity, that regardless of how much they seem to benefit, how much they seem to enjoy on a spasmodic basis of being exposed to me, that there is obviously a point past which they'll never be able to go until these wounds are cured, they're healed. And it's simply not true. No matter what terms your wiring had picked up before you got here, to wit, being enlightened, or being awakened, if I had made you specific promises, which any decent guru or religion is supposed to do, about what this is about, if I had simply said, all right, it will bring you to a point, if you're properly attracted to this, and I'll tell you shortly whether you are or not, or you'll simply drift away, what it's going to lead to, I'll describe to you very simply. It's going to lead to the point that you're no longer part of the wounded. It's going to take you to a secret place that the vast majority, just a handful at any given time on this planet, will take them to a secret place that nobody but this handful will know. They'll never get close to it, but the secret place is going to show you one thing, that being wounded makes you think there's a secret going on. You chuckle, some of you now, but how long would you have stayed with this? Beyond perhaps a perfunctory offer to shake my hand and thank me for my time, you know, going out and find something really worthwhile. Something that's getting down to these very intricate problems. Most of you didn't participate. For those hearing this on the tape, a few hours before this evening's meeting, I asked everyone to respond to this question, to write me a response. And I had the question posted that said, if I could grant magical abilities, or if you could, it didn't have to be me, if in some way you could have magical abilities to the point that you could affect or you could cure two, and then I gave a choice of weaknesses, flaws in you, fears, ills, what would they be? And out of all these responses, almost none of you, which you can look at this as a good sign, almost none of you played right. So that shows that there has been, to the least of you, some good effect. But there's always something beyond these apparent physical tasks, you should know, that you should have had occasion to neuralize in those several hours, those of you that took it seriously enough, that you could recall the kinds of wounds that had I asked you this 2 years ago. Or if I'd really made you believe I could do it, but even theoretically, if I said, all right, I have the ability to undergo a few things, and there are two, you can name them whatever you want to, but things that you would like to change about you, weaknesses, ills that you have, flaws in your character or your ability. All right, there's a little procedure. You stick with me and I'll show it to you, and you'll have 2 minutes, a particular time, I'll tell you when, that you can change two things, once and for all. What are they? All right, enough of you in this several hours or several seconds, as soon as you saw the notice posted tonight, you should have been able to go back into your own nervous system past. It's still there. And think about the kinds of things, had I asked you this when we first met, that you would have said immediately. Just immediately. If you can cure this, God bless you. Sir, I'll be with you from now on. Or if I can't, once you cure them, I'll be sure and I'll write and tell you how I'm doing. And I'll remember you on your birthday. But everybody, there are just several glaring things. There are wounds I've got that I'm not even sure I can make it through. I'm not sure I'll live out my average days on this planet. I am wounded. I am bleeding. It is with me always. It is a hurt. It is a fear. If you can show me how to cure this, if you can cure it, oh, listen, I'm with you. You cannot start at the level to tell somebody that this is a healing process, but what it amounts to is to find out that you're not really sick, to find out that the wounds are not the final statement. They're not even the beginning statement of what you are. The wounds that people feel is synonymous with breathing. It is synonymous with brain activity. It is synonymous with a blue circuit being in business. Simply put, to be alive is to be wounded. Now, even within the context I've just described, everyone in here is not of the, in some general classification, even within the arbitrary group that I detailed as being internally focused. I said that I was going to point out a few exceptions of people drawn to this, even in this room now. That the majority of people always, not just you people, it's always been true, they first get attracted to this, to however it happened. You do feel as though I am seeking, and perhaps this is the source of a cure, of a healing for my wounds. Now, there are a few of you in here, and it's not right or wrong. I don't mean that one's better or worse, but there are a few of you in here that stayed with this, and will probably can't ever extract yourself from it, that are not as arbitrarily classified into the internally and externally focused. There are some of you sitting in this room right now, and there's some of you in other cities that I know right now personally. There's some of you in here that even when you got here, you didn't feel that as wounded as I'm talking about. You were not continually pondering your wounds. You were not continually asking yourself philosophical questions. Some of you, back to my original arbitrary division of those that apparently are internally and externally focused, some of you attracted to this, and there's more than 2 or 3 of you in here right now, you're almost in a middle, right there on the line, that you didn't really feel that wounded. That if I had promised in some way, well, look, I'll cure whatever your wounds are, you thought, well, I don't have anything cured. I just like, it's intriguing what you're talking about. Can I stay? Or if I'd insisted, what's your wounds, maybe you'd have tried to make up one. So people that don't feel wounded, they make up very poor wounds. They just jump out. I mean, I can't be fooled by a fake wound. But there are people attracted to this that really feel no great wound. That is, I'm just trying to make this clear, it's not as simple as I'm putting it verbally. It is simpler, of course, but having to put words on it, it becomes unsimple. There are some of you that it's almost an accident that you end up in this. It might have been that you was on your way to a date, or it might have been that you'd been saving up for a new Corvette and you couldn't get the loan that day, and you're just sitting home with nothing to do, and you saw an ad saying, I was going to speak somewhere. It's just almost an accident that you didn't feel that wounded, and you're not, if I ask you now, how'd you end up here? You probably no longer tell me. Even if you could go back and in some way feel as best you could the memory of when you first heard of this or first saw me, you still got no clear recollection of, well, I thought, finally I've met a man who can heal my wounds, who can soothe me, to calm the spirit. But you don't even have that kind of recollection. It's just more on the basis of, I have just always found this absolutely fascinating. There's nothing in life, and some of you feel that a lot of it is up here. And I'm not going to correct you for you right now, because remember, nothing is that isolated, but I am fully aware that some of you feel as though this is just really the greatest intellectual gymnasium that I have ever been exposed to. I mean, you can't even compare this with philosophy. You can't compare it with anything you ever heard about. That I can apparently be leading you along some little primrose path, and I can go off in directions that it strikes you that if you had forever, or if you were the single reflection of that old story about having a room full of 1,000 chimpanzees, and each one of them had a typewriter, that given enough time they would eventually turn out the complete works of Shakespeare. Based upon that, it strikes you that if you had forever, if you read every book, that you actually sit and you read every great thinker, you took every drug, it strikes you that no matter what I'd done, I would have never gone over there where you went. And it's just amazing, because there's something to it. It is so simple, it is so complex, it is so insane, it strikes something in me. That was the few exceptions I was going to point out. 30 minutes ago, at least you think that my memory is slipping in my old, what was that? Oh, age. But besides those exceptions, if you're one of them, don't feel either this way or that by it. But the rest of you feel as though, when you came here, that you were wounded, that you were fearful, you were fitful, or sort of on the other hand of that, you've had feelings that I'm being driven by a sense of a kind of at least simmering outrage at life. The need to get revenge, if it's not specific against my parents, just against life. Things are so fucked up. I just want to run the street and grab people. When people cut in me on traffic, or when I read that somebody has mistreated a child or an animal, if I get my hands on them, by God, they wouldn't do it again. It's just a feeling of outrage that things have got to be fixed. That is a wound also. If there's any proper description for this evening of July the 11th, I will tell you it's all open to be expanded. And I, of course, reserve the right, without telling you, to always abandon, to fold in on itself, to expand on itself, any of these verbalizations. But you can truly look upon this as the ultimate healing. And it's not simply some magic. It's not simply me laying the hands upon you. But it is life growing in a certain way, and for it to grow in a certain way through people, through a certain group of people, always being pushed beyond the limit of what things are going on in the general body of life, at least as seen in our dimension here on Earth. That is, you look around, there's only a few people involved with this. It is to push them past the point that they are not wounded at this level, that their life is no longer tied around, I am wounded. I have these horrendous daydreams. I have these nightmares. I have these irrational but almost incapacitating fears. And you don't even want me to talk about them. And if you knew how I sit at home and tremble and the things that I imagine are going to happen to me, and I know they're irrational. Of course, I knew they're irrational before I met you. But I'm wounded there. And you don't seem to want to take this into account. I've got to deal with this. There is a simplicity to it that is an absolute healing process, that you're no longer wounded. It's not through faith of some kind. It is not through adopting a slogan I made up. It's not through adopting some intricate philosophy or pseudo-religious teaching that I have said has come from the gods. It's not putting your faith in that and realizing, all right, based upon that, if I give allegiance to what he describes, that he says come from higher powers, then I can't be wounded, because you're back in that trap. If I'm wounded, it shows that I am not fully participating in this. If I'm wounded, it simply shows that I don't keep the laws. It simply shows that I don't go to confession. So it's proof positive, and it's not. It's not proof of anything. If you're wounded, you're alive. If you continue to be wounded, you're alive, and you're at line level consciousness. You are serving life with the majority of people. To taste consciousness, which I can relatively, in relative safety speak of some of this now, we've gone so far, and I'm about to have to change it when we start this publicly. Enough of you are close enough that you get little pieces of me saying this. It's no longer a promise, and it's not any longer a matter of me holding out some kind of promise or bait, except for you people that's just been exposed to this for a few months, and that's just the way it is. So remember, I'm not saying this to you, just to ignore it as best you can. But this group as a whole is close enough that you're going to find that the initial, which is quite satisfactory, but the initial payoff of all this is a healing of all wounds, that you're no longer conscious at the wounded level, and that your wounds you then see were absolutely irrelevant. Of course, I keep pulling out examples of saying it's irrelevant as the size of your nose. But of course, at line level consciousness, you know this, that there are people that will feel, quite really, to them, that their greatest wound is the size of their nose. In other words, my comparison does not hold even sweat. But it is irrelevant that if you're alive, you feel wounded, unless you're part of the first category I mentioned, and none of you are, you wouldn't be here. You'd be out there working in the bank. You'd be out there selling real estate here at 11 o'clock at night. You'd be out making a fortune, and you could help buy us a place. But see, that's the way, that's the way justice is. Still, a part of why I'm telling you, or talking the way I am tonight, and that I do periodically, and even when I tell you part of the reasons why, and then I tell you that I'm fully aware that most of you, or a lot of you, don't not even hear me saying this. So I'm going to go through the whole process again right quick. Part of this is on the basis that you need to have your own profitable understanding, attempt to gain some insight into why this finally has to go public to some degree, why this must do as it does when it moves publicly, why it can't stay like this, why it is not preordained in some way, why there is not a handbook that the guides have not told me. Life itself has not told me, all right, the day's going to come that you're going to have X number of people, and they'll walk through fire with you, and they'll trust you, and then, once you get all that settled, then you'll do some kind of little trick, and you'll make them all feel as though they're no longer wounded in a serious manner. You'll get them closer into touch with the great forces that drive this, and then here's what you do. You go such and such place, you get such and such building, you start advertising in this way, and you write a book. That only happens in the real world. That is not the way it happens. But there is something, it's not the first time I've pointed this out, so even if you think you see quite deeply into this, I assure you there's more to be seen. That's why I bring it up again. There is something more for all of you to gain from trying to neuralize continually, and around the edges, as this begins to more and more unfold itself, what happens, whatever it is, when I start doing this, and you start doing it, really is the body to my circuit on a public level, and to neuralize why it can't operate at this level. Not just what may appear to be obvious to you, but I can't go out and talk to people. I can't send you out talking to people trying to imitate me, verbally or otherwise. Any of you could examine even the own voices you have now. That many of you have had, or all of you have had this, at least in passing, of why do I keep talking about having to do something more publicly? Why do I just keep sitting here fooling with you? Why don't I do more than just every year or so go to some cities and set up little quick meetings? The truth, the validity, the power of this, the intelligence of it. Why don't I sit and what's all this stalling around about? Just write a book or go ahead and we'll all collect money and put me on national TV, and I'll just say it, and just all across the country people just go, oh my God, I've been living in some kind of dream all my life, and now, heavens, I'm astounded. Now, all of you had at least once that voice. Why the hell don't I do that and get it over with? Why do I keep fooling around with a little small group of people? All I got to do is get way up on a mountaintop somewhere, which of course mounts to network TV nowadays, and just say all this. But also now, the time has come that all of you, at least collectively, even though you don't necessarily understand what you might say the dynamics behind it, you do realize, at least when I say it, that that ain't the way it would fly. It simply ain't. Then I would leave for your individual neuralization further, is then in what kind of way can it be presented? And you can try and neuralize this in several ways. The two primary ones I would point to you is this. It's start on the basis of what I have been doing here the last several years with you. Just take our Thursday night meetings. All right, how could we take this as a given? This is the basis of the new teaching. All right, how can we in some way homogenize, pasteurize, reflavor, recolor this, and make it palatable to a large group of people, to go from there? All right, the other one I said I would point out as the two most salient ones I would suggest you pursue. The other one is, all right, let's start on the premise, ignore all of this and start as best you can. Of course, you got to be unwounded, you got to be free from this to approach such as this, but to start with a clean slate. I'll forget everything that he's done, everything he said, not the reality of all the words, all the terms, all this tricky, staggering around, egocentric process. If he turned to me and said, all right, you're in charge, you got a week, I want you to plot everything, the name of this, the basic tenets, everything about it. You got a week, but you can't use anything I've used. And if you get too close, I'm going to slap your little face. We're going to do something horrible to you. And so you had to start, and I just said, it can resemble what's been going on here. Then what would you do? What can you neuralize? Where could this possibly go? Because life is certainly trying to do something. But the kind of automatic belief that I already know exactly what to do and how to do it, when it starts getting outside me dealing with you people, and as I point out, that's sort of come to an end. That is me collecting other people here. As far as there being some kind of set process, there's not. Now, up until now, it has always been within a general area that was presented, and it's always been the historical, religious context, where it simply comes out that suddenly somebody, there always seems to be somebody at the head of it, in the middle of it, and then some group of people come forth, and here it is, it's religion. Religion revisited. Religion revitalized. A particular renaissance of some specific religion. I point out to you, it is a sitting duck. It has been the best vehicle when you think life has used it. And I can say, as I have pointed out here and there, that religion, in the sense that it is now practiced, is going into D. That everything that is born goes into D. Everything that one time apparently was C moves into D. And it comes out something else. Religion is no exception. But it has apparently always been a continual replanting, a rejuvenation of religion. But that day, and I'm not saying it's going to happen next week, I'm not even saying it's happening in our lifetime, because it does not just happen by a cutoff, as all of you should suspect. It is not the linear phenomenon that ordinary consciousness compartmentalizes everything, including great historical dramas, into. But the time is arriving. It's been arriving ever since it first started. It's been arriving ever since it first stopped. That this religious context, as it is now understood, will be gone. There'll be something taking the position that is encompassing, and that it is life spokesman in the same way. But the thing about a man standing here and waving one book, the Bible or whatever, and saying, here is what God said, and that we're here to suffer, and that religion is some kind of atonement to the gods, all of you should be able to get some glimpse of that day it is slowly going into E. It's just becoming more and more irrelevant. That is not what religion will be if you could come back to this life at some future time. So then you could deal with the possibility that, all right, we are a part, which we are, of some new birth. So I say, okay, you're right. Come up with a new context. Forget all of that. You come up with it. You got until next week. I don't have time to fool with it. I'm got to go out of town. You come up with it. I trust you. Whatever you come up with, I'll either throw you out if it's so terrible. There's only two choices. It's so bad, I'll just throw you out and I don't want to see you again. The other one is, if it's not that bad, whatever it is, we're going to do it. I mean, that's it. We're going to do it. It's going to get started. I'm not going to change. We're going to do it. That's it. But try and abandon all connection with religions that's known. And you say, fine, I got you. And I go away. What would you come up with? Now, I know many of you would have a response. that you were trying to describe? Well, there'd be some kind of more scientific approach to fulfilling the human potential, maybe particularly in the intellect of man. That would be my approach. That sounds fine. But you can pick up the paper, and they got seminars going on with that almost every week in every city. How to develop oneself through self-hypnosis, through self-denial, through imagining oneself as being different. In other words, could you come up with something new? Could you come up with something new that was not connected with something already established? Could you come up with a better general vehicle than religion has always been? A few little concluding notes. Even though I don't expect that everyone has any great revelations, even if you got anything out of it, of me saying that there is a kind of mechanical but quite real and quite functional connection between the apparent religious leaders, a particular leader, a preacher, a guru somewhere, and those that get attracted to him, whether it be in the hundreds or the thousands or the millions. But part of it, right at the heart of it, is that the things that the man is denouncing are the things apparently he's informing people about. If here's a better way to do it, he is wounded in the same way as they are. That simply is. You should be able to get some glimmer of the light behind that. That is lacking between me and you, and it is seriously lacking. See, here, I take it into consideration there are other things afoot here between us than just verbalization. But for me to suddenly go out on a mountaintop, be on TV, and to try and talk to large groups of people, there is a serious flaw there. Unless, of course, you want to say that I would act it, that I would fake it, for very good reasons. Possibly I would, possibly I could. But attempting to deal with some large group of people in some similar way, apparently emotionally, and even verbally, that I have with you these number of years, for me to get a large group of people, attract them somewhere, they feel it in a way they don't understand, but there is a serious gap. We have a serious communication problem. Because something is wrong and they can't put their finger on it. And the point is I am not wounded, period. And I would have to lie, even if it was willfully. I would have to fake it, and I won't carry it any further. There is simply already established a great gulf, a flaw, an interruption in the circuitry between me and other people. Now, would anyone like to, and remember that's not me personally, this has been true whoever it was, now would any of you like to continue to ask the question, what in the hell are you here for? The last few times I've been out in public, a lot of you were out in California and up in New York. You remember that last few months back when I went to LA and San Francisco and then New York. There I was, all dressed up and took a shower and shaved. They advertised it and I came out. And I didn't say anything that shocking. Most of you had heard variations of it before, other than my, I thought, humorous intros that certainly upset a lot of people. But what I was getting at, by now, some of you should have this quite real sensation. Now, it could come about and you feel as though it was almost blasphemy. But some of you should have almost had this sensation that the last, let's take those last 3 times I did there in several weeks, of taking into consideration just your feel of me coming out, what seemed to occur between me and the people. In other words, the whole experience, that evening with Jan. Some of you should now, once I point it out, should have this feeling that in a quite real way, you could do it better than I could. And any of you who can hear that, can hear that. And then you might ask yourself again, what is all this about and why have I attracted you people? There is a reality to the fact, to this impression that I said that if you understand it correctly, there is validity to it, that now some of you would not be ill-informed by that impression that, wait a minute, I know all of this, and since it's due to him, I got it from him, none of this will happen without him, and he must know what he's doing, but with this group of people, I could do it better than he's doing it. I've never planned it, I never thought about it, and God forbid he told me to, but just the feeling that, you know, no form of criticism, but just, wait a minute, I could do it nowadays better than you could. Something's happened. You're right. And you're going to have to. There is a connection, there is a possible connection. There is a channel between you and larger numbers of people that is already there. It is, I won't play with words, it is simply there, and it's the most efficient, it's the way it happens, that you can now move it in a way that truly, in a sense, is more efficient, is better than I would. And it is not, of course, you know, it is not going out and mouthing me. And it is not, although we're going to have to do some of this, that time's still upon us, I'm going to put together a Bible. Well, everybody's working on it, whether you know it or not, the translations, and I have people retranslating it, and I have people editing it, and I have people editing the editors. I have enough going on that I don't have to fuck with it's the point. That I run it through enough people now, the least of you, the youngest of you, it's going through enough hands now. It's not just the translations verbally, literally everything going on. It is now going through so many stages, through so many hands of being redone over and over, that I no longer have to fool with it, which I was not going to, I do not want to, it is not profitable. But when it gets to me now, it's exactly what I would have done. So at any rate, we'll end up with a, quote, Bible. But the point is also, it is not on the basis that you people are going out and wave it, like the good evangelists do, the Christian Bible, and say, here it is, the Word of God. This is not the Word of God in our Bible. That's what I said. And we may even doctor it even less than that. I may blame it on more than me. Well, I must tell you the truth, that day is not yet past. The public has always got the feel, whether I change my name or whether we name me Mr. X, still the wiring of everyone has got the feel that there is somebody behind this. If they never see me, if we said he was dead, but we worked with him all these years and he left it with us. He told us on his deathbed, here's the exact words, here's what he said. But they have still got to have the feeling that somebody, somewhere, one person was responsible for this. But still, what I was trying to get you to begin to see yourself, you're going to have to become the living body to this kind of circuit that I've established. You can, in a real sense, do it better than I can now. You can certainly do it more efficiently. And even if you don't accept the first two, I'm going to put it this way, you're going to do it anyway. Which is, of course, what I refer to as real democracy. Also, a part of you becoming the body of this, the physical reality of it, is going to create, even in those of you that feel as though you are still far away from a real healing of your wounds, or a real understanding that the wounds are not you, just by becoming involved with this, whatever responsibilities you end up with, it will bring about what amounts to a forced kind of healing. That you won't be able to stay wounded. You won't be able to still stay conscious on the level of your wounds and to properly do what you have to do. And a large part, all the way from a large part, ranging from a large part to absolute, what you're going to have to do is going to be left in your hands. I am already dividing up into groups which are not of any great importance insofar as what group you end up in. With these 4 or 5 sections, I'm going to turn over areas, such as advertising. I don't mean just limited to one thing, but I'm going to turn it over, and whatever I finally, and it's going to be shortly, I'm either going to, here's another range for you, I'm either going to give you a general idea of my suggestion how the body of this thing should begin to live. That's the maximum. The minimum is going to be, I mean, nod to 1 or 2 people and say, all right, it's time to go, tell them. And that's it. I've got nothing else to say to you, and you won't be able to come to me. This is one extreme. But these areas are very close together, that's why I'm telling you. That you're not going to be able to come to me and say, all right, we've decided, our section, we're in charge of this and this, and we decided that the most efficient thing is going to be either this or this. What should we do? Because I'm going to tell you beforehand the areas in which I may respond, or as I said, I may tell you that once this is set in motion, that you no longer can ask me any question. That it sinks, it swims, it flies, it crashes, and it's you. And that I may, in specific areas, or in toto, that I may give you a cutoff time and just state it, and that's it. And you know by now how hard-headed I am. There must be a metaphysical term for that. That I won't answer any questions, no suggestions. That, all right, now's the time you do it. And that's it. That is a kind, it's not the final answer, but that is, will produce in those already here, it will produce a kind of forced, you can either look at it as a kind of forced healing, or it's going to create a kind of forced absolute insensitivity to your wounds. You simply can't do both. You'll be gone. You'll crumble under it. You'll go away wounded worse than when you came here. Let me make one of my few corrections. Let me retract that. Because now, truly, again, I bring it up, if any of you still feel seriously unfulfilled by this, that it has not been what you thought, truly and absolutely, I tell you, now is the time to simply walk away from it. And you won't be worse off. You won't go away more wounded than when you came here. Not now. Not by any stretch of your imagination. Nothing bad will happen to you. You won't go away with a curse on your head. I wish you no ill. You walk out and that's the end of it. But now is the time, literally, for you to do it. And anyone who has any serious doubts, go away and even fall back in the hands of your old system. If it's that strong, you should. Go away and think about it. Go away and worry about it. Go away and try to be reasonable about it. You know, has this been have I gotten as much from this as I thought I would? Have I gotten as much out of it as sometimes I think I do? Is it some kind of dream I'm in? Is it some kind of trickery? Am I just going there out of habit? Was I so lonely when I got here that I just feel like these people, I like most of them in here now, and hell, he could start talking about bird watching or petunia raising on Thursday and I'd still show up. If by now that does satisfy you, you can stay here. But if you still have serious voices that cry out to be entertained, to be listened to, of feeling unfulfilled by this, you should go. I mean, you've given a good enough chance. It is simply the time to go. Just walk away from it, and you're no worse off. You're a little better off, but you're certainly not going to be harmed for it, but now's the time to jump ship. I've got a couple of tasks. And this, do you notice, of course not all of you notice, those of you that I'm about to mention notice it because you're the ones I'm talking about, that some of you almost never put forth any real effort for these kind of tasks. Some of you, in fact, always have an excuse. I couldn't do it. Something happened. I understand that. If you think just my memory's faulty and I don't notice that you're always that way, or you do hand in something, and it's just, you surely don't think that I don't see what it is. And if you think, well, maybe he just talks big about not putting up with this, but he's just a big old softy, and I'm aware of all of it. Some of you will never, and you're part of the ones I said are kind of out of the mainstream. I don't mean that in either a positive or negative way. But some of you, in a sense, are just, and I mean this in a very broad way, are just entertained by this. And that me telling you to do a task, you just don't really take it that seriously. You don't see the point in it, or you've tried it before, and it's just nothing. coming here on Thursday on a good night, however it happens, that I seem to be in good form or you people are in good form, it's as much fun as you could think about having. And that's about all it amounts to. But you have missed something, but I'm aware of it, and you shouldn't suffer over it. If I've let you stay here, I'm aware of it. I know how that is based in you. But you have missed something by not trying to participate. Well, I got a couple. One of them is specific. I want you, it's another story time. I'll give you 2 weeks. I want you to write me. It can be a short story. It can be long. And here's the basis. A person, the hero or the heroine, is granted the ability to do external magic. Their intention, after they once get this ability, you can make up anything, a genie, the spirit of a elephant with a hernia that the person helped, and it rewarded it with any way that the person came up with this ability. But then they turn this ability on a specific object, that is a person or a group of people, that they turn their ability, that's the base of the story, on this particular object, that is person or persons, to do them good in a specific way. But then you've got to make up the story of how things begin to spread and how everything's connected to where the outcome is they do harm, noticeable, measurable harm to the object, that is the person or the group of people that they start out to help. The crudest example that everyone's familiar with, I don't want to even make up my own example because it might infringe upon something you come up with, so I'll give an example everybody's heard about. I don't guess most people's ever looked at the story this way, the King Midas story. Let's say that he was given the ability that anything he touched would turn to gold. Let's say that he was given that ability that he wasn't even a king maybe. Maybe it's a poor king. And they gave him the ability and he thought, the first thing I'll do is I'll help my family because they have suffered and they're so hungry and poor. And he runs to his family to tell them what happens and he grabs them in his arms. In other words, he turns the whole family into gold. They're no longer hungry because they're dead. And then he goes, oh, what have I done? At any rate. But, and don't just sit down and hand me in something. If you really don't get anywhere with this, not only am I disappointed, I don't even believe it, given 2 weeks. But think about just any ordinary thing that you, the way you were wired up, if somebody gave you this ability, who would you want to turn around and help? Either what person, like your mother, your father, some aunt you have, or what group of people? That maybe it's not just an individual. You'd like to turn to some group and do something. Something that would be measurable by you, be defendable, just however you put it, is this would be doing good. But then the story can't end it suddenly, well, I got an aunt who's poor, and I'd say, all right, here's $1 billion. The story has got to build up some kind of framework that you're trying to produce this, quote, good result toward the object, the person or persons. And through the complexity, the unrecognized connection of everything, by attempting to do this good, it slips back upon itself, and the kicker of the story is that the very group, the object that the person or persons you attempted to help, or the hero or heroine did, they end up almost destroying. Just because of the way things are connected. And I'm not going to tell you any more. One other one that's more passive, since I assume all of you have access to a television set, I want you to try and get in at least an hour in the next week. I want you to sit down and turn on, catch these TV evangelists. If you got a good remote control, of course, you can jump from station to station, just watch one of them for 2 or 3 minutes or until it gets boring and flip to another one. What I want you to do, try to pick up these. They're on every night, it seems like, at some time of the night on those UHF stations. Ones where the real services, that they filmed it out there and the guy's really in good fettle. Somebody owns a fettle, but. I want you to listen. But I want you to listen. For one thing, I want you to listen that the least of them, the least knowing, those that may seem to be the most dogmatic, those that your own wiring system might say, if anybody on this planet doesn't understand what religion's about, it's him. Forget all that. I want you to listen to what he's saying, and I want you to hear that unknowingly all he's doing is talking about this. And that's it. That's all he's talking about. Life after death, he's talking about this. God wants you to do this, he's talking about this. God says, don't do that. He waves this book, and he says, it says right here, the spokespeople of God throughout the ages have said, this is the truth. This is what man must do. This is what God wants man to do. And of course, forget all that and listen. They're talking about this. You've heard it all right here. Of course, you'd heard all this before, but you didn't know it. Because what you heard was the wounded talking. And what you heard was the wounded talking about your mutual wounds. What you heard was the line level of consciousness. What you had heard was all available information. And it won't do. It can't extract you from being the puppet. It cannot extract you from the area of feeling as though I am insufficient, I am dissatisfied, and nothing can be done. It extracts you from being ordinary. It heals all wounds, because it makes you see that the wounds are, in fact, ordinary existence. It is the ordinary level of consciousness. But I want you to sit down as a task, not just sit there and read TV at the same time or talk. I want this as a part of a task, is to sit there. Like I said, it'd be nice if you could, even if you don't have remote control, sit up close and turn on, get 2 or 3 of them, and just sit there and watch a few minutes of different ones talking and listen. And all they're doing is talking about this. They can't help it. Of course, the popes and everybody else is talking about it too. I'm just saying, here's a place that you don't even have to dress up or go out of the house. It's right there on TV. And from one viewpoint, you could say that they are further from the reality of it now, these impassioned, in many cases, primarily red circuit driven, that their wounds are the fears of sex, the fears of being alive. So in one sense, it's of no importance, but in one sense, these are very low level, even in the ordinary level, that they're very low level with inside the line of consciousness, vis-a-vis life talking. So in other words, in a sense, they're an extreme example compared to some others. But they still can't help it. You could be turning on an Episcopalian program, assuming they have one on TV. I'm using that, in my sense, as being the driest, most mechanically cerebral of religions, the least passionate. And so you could listen to them, or you could listen to the Pope giving one of his homilies or one of his little messages. And it's still the same thing. But you get to the point of the ones I'm telling you to go ahead and avail yourself of the visual boombox and watch these guys rant and rave, hollering about the wounded nature of humanity, which of course is themselves. And you might say in one sense is about as far removed, the way that on the surface they're doing, is what I'm doing. And you listen, and it's the same damn thing. But they're saying God, life after death, sin, evil. And you've heard it all before. In front of your very eyes. Those of you who didn't blink, I explained it all away. I told you what it was.